Macky Caldwell was officially born as Maxwell Eugene Caldwell III. He was given the nickname Macky. Even as a baby, Macky was unusual. He resisted affection. The minute he was done nursing, he would scream until he was put in his playpen. He would scream whenever he was being held, and seemed to only be comfortable and happy as long as he wasn't being touched. His parents, Mac and Jean Caldwell, had taken him to his pediatrician several times, concerned about their infant and their parenting, to be honest. They felt guilty about keeping him in his playpen in his crib all day and all night. The doctor dismissed it as being a personality quirk and said to let the boy be himself. So they did. Macky didn't start speaking until he was 3 years old. His parents had again taken him to the pediatrician, who, again, dismissed it as a quirk after testing to see that Macky could hear. All the while, Macky sat in his crib and his playpen. His parents had given him a bear they called Chubbs. Macky would take Chubbs with him back and forth between the crib and playpen. It was the only thing that Macky would show affection to, be it human, animal, or toy. When Macky was 4 years old, he'd put Chubbs in front of his face to answer any questions or to speak in any way, and he always spoke in third person with a strange voice, and he wouldn't speak directly to anyone. His parents were increasingly concerned. Macky would soon be starting school, and they knew that he would be made fun of and picked on. Plus, they felt in their guts that there was something wrong with Macky. They had a pet kitten, and one day they found Macky with her in the bathroom. The kitten was soaking wet, and there was water in the sink which had spilled all over the floor. Macky had scratches on his hand, his neck, and his face. When Jean asked him what had happened, Macky held up Chubbs in front of his face and said, "Macky thinks the cat talks about him. Macky wanted Cat to swim in the sink to make friends." Jean had replied that cats do not like water, and that Macky had better never do that to the cat again. And when she told Mac about it, her face was as white as a sheet. "Listen to me, Mac. I think he tried to drown her," she said, her voice quivering. "Now, Jean," Mac replied, "we have no reason to think that. He's young. Perhaps he was just trying to play with her, and if he was, then that's a huge step forward for Macky, right?" "Yeah," Jean started. "Yeah, I mean, I guess so." But she couldn't get the feeling from the pit of her stomach. When Macky was 8, the neighbor's dog was found hanging on the Caldwell's fence. Unfortunately, it was not the only injured pet that had been found in the neighborhood recently. Kate Simmons had come over banging on their door, her face red from crying, nearly hysterical. "Jean! Oh, Jean! Come to your backyard, quick!" And she grabbed Jean's arm. Mac and Macky right behind them. Jean and Mac gasped. "Quick, Mac! Take Macky into the house! He can't see this!" yelled Jean, her heart racing as she clamored to find something to cut the dog down with. That's when she heard it. "Macky was tired of dog barking all night. Dog won't bark anymore." She looked up at Mac. He'd heard it too, their eyes flashing to Kate, but she was too overwhelmed with grief and the sound of her own crying to hear Macky. Jean and Mac were relieved. But later that night, when Macky was sleeping, Mac admitted that he was afraid for Macky. "This isn't just a quirk, Jane," he said, wringing his hands. This is, I don't know. What is this? He turned to Jean, who was visibly shaking. I don't know, Mac. Is he acting out because a baby's coming? She asked. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, almost protectively. Maybe, said Mac. Let's take him to Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones was the doctor that Macky's pediatrician had referred to them after he finally threw up his hands in the air and admitted that this was all new to him. Dr. Jones was a psychiatrist who worked with a lakeside asylum. They had been told that he dealt with many types of people and conditions and would be a very good candidate to help them with Macky. Dr. Jones was bright-eyed and funny, in his early 40s, younger than the couple had expected. Dr. Jones didn't treat Macky like he was different or quirky. He treated Macky like a peer. He never spoke down to him or in baby talk, and he always included Macky in on the conversations with Macky's parents. Jean and Mac liked and trusted him very, very much. While they were waiting in their waiting room to see Dr. Jones, Macky held up Chubbs and said, Macky doesn't want to see Dr. Jones anymore. Macky wants to go home. No! And when he gritted his teeth, and the word now came out of his mouth, both of his parents visibly jumped. And when they did, the corner of Macky's lips went up in a type of strange and concerning smile. Before they could react, Dr. Jones asked them to come in. He asked Macky about the neighbor's dog, and when he did, Macky held up Chubbs. Macky was sick and tired of the dog barking. Macky is glad the dog tied his neck with a rope. Then the doctor pressed Macky a bit more. The dog tied his neck, Macky? He asked. Yes, that's what Macky said already. And he was showing anger in that voice of his. Listen, Dr. Jones began. Macky, you're having a new baby brother or sister come to live with you. Do you know that? And Macky made a sudden hand movement, nearly throwing Chubbs up. Yes! Macky knows that. Macky won't love the baby. Macky, started Dr. Jones, can you speak to me without Chubbs? I need to speak to you, Macky. And for a split second, Macky's eyes darted to Dr. Jones, and then he threw up Chubbs in front of his face again. Macky is talking to you, doctor. Okay, Macky. We need to discuss this new baby. You will need to be a great big brother. The baby will cry a lot, Macky. Do you understand that? No, it won't, said Macky firmly. Yes, Macky, it will. And you'll need to understand that. You'll need to understand that this baby needs you to protect it because you're the big brother. And again, Chubbs went up quickly. Macky is the child, Dr. Jones. The baby won't stay long. The baby will want to go live somewhere else. No, Macky, started Jean. Macky, the baby is ours. The baby will be part of our family. He or she will love you and us and live in our home. Macky stood up and stared at his mother. Dr. Jones stood up as well, and so did Mac. Macky threw Chubbs up in front of his face and slowly said, We'll see about that. Macky wants to go home now, Mother. Macky wants to go home now, Mother. Macky wants... Dr. Jones interrupted Macky at that point. Macky, you will stop this nonsense right this minute. Do you hear me? And with the blink of an eye, Macky was up and over the desk in front of Dr. Jones. He was holding Chubbs in one hand, and with the other, he reached out for the throat of Dr. Jones, and when he made contact, he knocked Dr. Jones back into his chair, and he began beating him about the face with a fist that held Chubbs tightly. Mac and Jean both grabbed Macky and pulled him off Dr. Jones. His face was red, sweating profusely. As he began to straighten his tie, Macky crawled up into the couch and fell asleep. He was quiet as a church mouse. Jean, Mac, sit down, instructed Jones. Listen, you know how fond I am of Macky. And the couple both nodded their heads. But I have to say, his behavior is concerning me. Perhaps we should consider admitting him here, in the hospital. Immediately, Jean and Mac shook their heads. No, sir, started Mac. There must be something we can do. He's our son. Mac was almost distraught at the thought of sending his son to an institution. Jean was crying into her hands, reconsidering her no answer. Mac looked at her. Jean? He asked. Jean, no. Right? She looked up and reluctantly answered, right. Of course not. No. Okay then, said Mac. I guess we'll be leaving now. Dr. Jones got up and opened his door to let them out. He was still shaken when Macky turned around, held up Chubbs, and whispered out of earshot of his parents, Nice try, Doc. 6 months later, the Caldwell family had a 3-month-old baby girl, and Macky was now 9 years old. Macky had been acting out. He'd begun lighting her stuffed animals on fire, and if Jean and Mac were honest, they knew that things were getting out of control. They had started taking shifts to allow each other to sleep. Mac slept in the evening, and Jean caught a few hours during the day. Mac took some vacation time to spend with Macky to try and make him feel just as loved as Tricia, the new baby. He'd take him to baseball games and bowling, but Macky would still only speak through Chubbs, which was getting Macky teased at school now. His parents have had to go to the principal's office several times. The principal expelled Macky for his own good, he had said. One night, the baby was fussy and crying. Jean was doing everything she could to calm her down. She laid Tricia on the bed for just a second while she went to warm a bottle, and when she came back, she noticed that she had stopped crying. Phew, thought Jean. She's finally asleep. And as she walked into the bedroom, what she saw terrified her. Macky had a pillow over Tricia's face, and he was sitting on it. When Jean screamed out, Mac came running, and as he grabbed Macky's arm and yanked him off the baby, he held up Chubbs and said, Macky hates her crying. Macky hates her. Macky wants her to die. Macky says don't touch his arm. Mac barely noticed what was being said. Jean was shaking Tricia. She was on her knees begging God to make her breathe. Life slowed down so slowly that Mac thought he could only see things more clearly than he'd ever been able to before, and he was seeing his limp child being held by his terrified wife. He turned suddenly to Macky with pure fury in his eyes, and he began to walk towards him when Macky yanked up Chubbs and said, If you touch Macky, Macky will kill you. His father stopped dead in his tracks, and behind him he could hear his wife yelling, She's breathing! She's breathing! Thank you, God! And for a split second, a cross look washed across Macky's face. Macky was placed in Lakeview Sanitarium before he was even 10 years old. He carried Chubbs with him until the day he died, which was at the age of 23 years old. He'd been sitting in the common area of the hospital when a new patient was yelling and screaming. Macky slowly crossed the room and began beating her with a fist that was holding Chubb's when an armed security guard killed Macky. The hospital called Jean and Mac Caldwell, and after they hung up the phone and walked away, they each breathed a sigh of relief.